Sebastian Blackwood, Earl of Ravenscourt, halted on the Hyde Park path with such sudden force that a gentleman behind him sidestepped and muttered something lost to the wind. London had summoned him for ledgers, for solicitors, for the careful sympathy of acquaintances mourning a wife he had buried with dignity, though never with heartbreak. This walk was meant to fill a vacant hour, nothing more. Yet there, across the sun-drenched gravel, stood the ruins of a life he had surrendered half a decade ago. His gloved fingers closed around the silver head of his cane. Something wrenched behind his ribs, something for which no polite vocabulary existed. He had not been thinking of her. He had not been thinking of anything at all. She sat on a bench beneath a chestnut, her gray pelisse drawn neatly over her knees, her bonnet angled to keep the light from her face. And there, kneeling at her feet with the grave attention of a man 4 times his age, a child gripped a small wooden horse. A boy, 3 years old perhaps, whose dark curls caught the afternoon sun in a way Sebastian had not witnessed since his own reflection stared back at him from a nursery glass 3 decades prior. Gravel shifted beneath his boot. Charlotte Ashworth raised her head. For one breath, her gaze passed over him without recognition. Then it landed. The blood left her face so entirely, so swiftly, that Sebastian understood from 20 paces what he had stumbled upon. Something he had never known was missing. 5 years before this moment, he had stood in the Grosvenor Square drawing room while his father, dying by slow degrees in a velvet chair, laid out the terms of the family's survival. The Blackwood estates carried debts Sebastian had never suspected. A young woman existed, sole daughter of a Yorkshire wool manufacturer, whose father's proposed dowry could silence every creditor and return Ravenscourt Abbey to respectability. The arrangement wanted only Sebastian's consent to become binding. He had been in love with Charlotte Ashworth then. He had never spoken it aloud. Her father, a country rector of slender means, possessed no dowry to offer. And Sebastian, with all the foolish patience of a young man convinced that time stretched endlessly before him, had trusted some future moment would arrive, a moment when his heart could be declared without betraying those who depended on him. That moment never materialized. Within 6 months of the old Earl's death, he married Miss Vivian Cartwright. Charlotte Ashworth, once a familiar figure at country assemblies, once his late mother's particular favorite, vanished from every drawing room and dance card. He had asked, carefully, indirectly, through shared acquaintances. Gone to a relation in the north, they told him. In mourning for an uncle, they explained. Then the explanations ceased altogether, and Sebastian, bound to a wife he owed loyalty and an estate that consumed his every waking hour, had trained himself to stop inquiring. Vivian died in their 2nd year together, a fever that carried her off in a fortnight. At her graveside, he discovered it was entirely possible to grieve with honesty for a woman one had respected deeply without ever truly loving. But the boy, crouched on the park gravel, demanded an accounting of a different order entirely. Sebastian had observed every prescribed week of mourning. He had tended his tenants, balanced his books. He had traveled to London this spring to serve his solicitors and no other soul. Now he stood rooted on a Hyde Park path, watching Charlotte Ashworth rise from her seat and press one swift hand to the shoulder of the child at her feet. The boy glanced up and spoke, words too soft for Sebastian to catch across the distance, and she smiled down at him. A smile meant only for the child's comfort. It stopped well short of her eyes. She bent and plucked the wooden horse from the grass. Lord Ravenscourt. Her voice reached him exactly as memory had preserved it, low, measured, the practiced composure of a woman raised to understand that a clergyman's daughter must never reveal what moved beneath her surface. "You are in London. I had not heard. Miss Ashworth." He offered a slight bow of his head. Beyond that, he did not trust his own tongue. The boy had risen now and stood studying him with the open, undisguised fascination of a child who had not yet learned the courtesy of looking away. Sebastian looked at the boy. The boy looked at Sebastian. Something behind his ribs shifted, a motion without a name. "This is my son," Charlotte said before the question reached his lips. Her hand closed over the child's shoulder. "Thomas. We are staying with my cousin in Half Moon Street for the season. You must forgive us, my lord. We were just about to return." His nurse will be expecting him. He kept his voice low. A couple drifted past behind them unnoticed. The servant hovered at a careful distance, a small basket hooked over her arm. I beg you, a moment only. There is nothing, she said, that requires a moment. Charlotte, her name, bare of title or courtesy, landed like a hand against glass. She looked down at the boy, then at the gravel, then at some distant point beyond his shoulder where the late sun had begun to stain the treetops red. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped so low he had to lean in to hear it. You will call upon me tomorrow if you must. Half Moon Street, number 11. 3 o'clock. But Lord Ravenscourt, I beg you, do not stand here looking at my son. There are too many people in this park. He straightened. Understanding arrived in him like cold water. What she was asking, and why. He bowed as formally as if they had been introduced at an assembly. Until tomorrow, Miss Ashworth. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come. He did not permit himself to look over his shoulder. Every muscle in his body strained toward the bench beneath the chestnut tree and the small boy with golden curls. The house in Half Moon Street was narrow and respectable, the sort of house taken for a season by families of good name and modest purse. A maid admitted him without ceremony and led him to a small front drawing room. The fire had been built up against the chill that arrived with the afternoon's thickening cloud. Charlotte was alone. She stood at the window, hands clasped before her. She did not turn when he entered. My cousin is at a lecture, she said. The servants have been told you are an old acquaintance of my father's. They will not disturb us. I have half an hour, perhaps a little more. Charlotte, please sit, my lord. He sat because she had asked it. He would rather have stood. The room carried the faint scent of beeswax and of the lavender she had always tucked into her handkerchiefs. She turned at last. He saw that she had composed herself with the terrible precision of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation many times and hoped never to hold it. His name is Thomas Edward Ashworth, she said. He was born in Northumberland, at my aunt's house near Alnwick. In the autumn of the year your marriage was announced. He is nearly 4. He knows me as his mother. He knows no father. I have told him, when he has asked, that his father was a gentleman who died before he was born. He has been satisfied with this, as young children are satisfied with what they are told by those who love them. She did not weep. She delivered each sentence as though reciting a text committed long ago to memory. The very flatness of her voice struck Sebastian harder than any tears could have done. Why did you not write to me? He said at last. You were a married man, Lord Ravenscourt. She met his eyes now. Whatever softness had once lived between them had been pressed by 4 years into something hard and bright and sorrowful. You were the Earl of Ravenscourt, with an estate to rescue and a wife who had brought you the means to rescue it. What was I to have written? That the daughter of a country parson, who had had no understanding with you, no engagement, no claim of any kind, carried within her a child conceived on the single evening you and I forgot, together, who we were. I would have destroyed you. I would have destroyed your wife. I would have destroyed my father, who did not live to see the winter out in any case. He died believing his daughter had gone to Northumberland to recover from a nervous complaint. And I would have done no good to the child, who would have entered the world as a living scandal instead of as my son. I would have provided for you. I did not want your provision, my lord. I wanted nothing you could give me that would not also require you to break your word to the woman who had trusted it. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He could not fathom how. He has my eyes, he said, his voice low. He has your father's eyes and your mother's hair and my mother's mouth, and he is the most solemn child I have ever encountered. And I love him, my lord, with a thoroughness that has left no space in me for anything else. I have constructed my life around him. It is a quiet life, a careful one, and I am thankful for it each morning. I came to London this month because my cousin fell ill and wanted company, and I persuaded myself that London is vast, that the likelihood of our crossing paths was negligible. I was mistaken. Charlotte. He stood now and moved to where she waited, stopping at what seemed a decent distance, though every nerve in him rebelled against it. I am not married. I have not been married for 2 years. I know that. My lord. Then you must also understand. I understand. that you are an earl, and that my son is born outside of law, and that the world you are obliged to inhabit does not pardon such things, whatever a man may feel in private. I understand that to claim him would be to render him and me a subject of whispered discussion in every parlor from here to Ravenscourt Abbey. I understand that your mother, had she lived, would have knelt before me and implored me to do exactly what I have done, to gather my child and my disgrace into the country and raise him to be a good man, unweighted by a name he has no legal right to carry. I understand all of this, Lord Ravenscourt. I have understood it for 4 years. He stood a long while without a word. Then he said, "You have not asked me what I want. What you want does not signify." "It does not signify," she repeated, but her voice had dropped and her gaze had turned from him. "Then allow me to say it regardless. I wish to know my son. I wish to know him not as a patron, not as some stranger who appears once a year bearing a gift, but as something greater, whatever form that greater thing might be allowed to take. And I wish, Charlotte, to tell you what I ought to have told you 5 years ago in my father's library. The evening he made plain to me what was required. I wish to say that I loved you then. I wish to say that I love you now. I wish to say that not 1 hour in 4 years has passed without my condemning myself for lacking the nerve to speak before the moment had gone. I am speaking now. I am late. I know that I am late, but I am speaking." She turned her face from him, and he saw her hand against the window frame, gripping the painted wood until her knuckles went white. "You must not," she said, "say such things to me. I have built my house on the certainty that they would never be spoken." "Then your house was raised on a false foundation." "My house was raised on the only foundation available to me." Outside, a barrel organ had started up somewhere in the street below, thin threads of a melody Sebastian did not recognize. He waited. He had learned during the long silence of his marriage that some conversations demanded a patience young men could not offer. At length, Charlotte drew a breath and said, still without turning, "You may call again on Thursday. My cousin will be well enough to receive you, and the servants will find less cause to speculate if a third person is present in the room. You may, if you wish, bring a small gift appropriate for a child of Thomas's age. A picture book would do, nothing lavish. He will be told you are a friend of his grandfather's, which is not untrue, your father having shown kindness to mine when he visited the Abbey. Beyond this, Lord Ravenscourt, I have nothing to offer you. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Then you will leave, please. I find I am not equal to anything more this afternoon." He bowed. At the door he paused, his hand upon the frame, and said without turning, "Charlotte, thank you." "For what, my lord?" "For not lying to me yesterday in the park. You could have lied. You did not." Behind him he heard the smallest sound. It might have been a breath released, or a word begun and then abandoned. He did not linger to decipher it. He closed the door softly behind him and stepped out into the thickening London dusk. He realized only upon reaching the corner of Piccadilly that tears were falling, quietly, without spectacle, in the manner of a man who has denied himself that release for longer than he can account for. Thursday he arrived carrying a book of colored engravings depicting English birds. Thomas, more solemn than Sebastian had been prepared to find him, examined the plates without a word for a full quarter of an hour. Then he declared the chaffinch his favorite, on account of its blue head. Sebastian, who had not known until that instant that a child's verdict on a chaffinch could dismantle a grown man, agreed with great seriousness that the chaffinch was criminally underestimated. Charlotte sat across from them, needlework in hand, and said nothing. When Sebastian stood to leave, she accompanied him to the hall and spoke quietly. Quote 21, quote 22. He came on Sunday. He sat 3 pews behind them, and through the congregation's hymn he caught the thin, clear thread of his son's voice. Afterwards, Charlotte introduced him to her cousin, a gentle, short-sighted widow called Mrs. Harrington, as Lord Ravenscourt, whose family were long acquainted with hers. Mrs. Harrington invited him to tea, and so it began, a slow, deliberate, formal acquaintance conducted in drawing rooms and along gravel paths, observed by a servant or a cousin or the courteous indifference of passing strangers. Within its careful borders, a great deal that could not be spoken was, nevertheless, by careful degrees, understood. Winter arrived early that year. By November, the pavements of Half Moon Street gleamed with morning frost. Thomas had acquired a small blue coat with brass buttons, of which he was fiercely proud. Sebastian had taken to visiting twice weekly, Tuesdays and Saturdays, at hours arranged in advance. He had begun learning things: that Thomas preferred bread without butter, that large dogs frightened him but horses did not, that he asked questions about stars, the insides of clocks, and whether fish slept. He had begun learning also what Charlotte had become across 4 years of solitary motherhood. She had grown quieter than he remembered, stronger, more precise. She laughed seldom, but when she did, it came without restraint. Sebastian had discovered he would attempt nearly any small foolishness to draw that sound from her. It was on an evening in late November, after the nurse had carried Thomas up to bed, that Sebastian finally spoke the words he had been traveling to Half Moon Street week upon week to deliver. Mrs. Harrington had withdrawn early, claiming a headache. The fire burned low. Charlotte sat holding a book she had not opened in a quarter of an hour. Sebastian sat opposite, watching the firelight shift across her face. At last, he set his own book down. Quote 23. She looked up. She had known, he realized, that this evening would arrive. Perhaps she had known from the moment in the park when she lifted her face and found him standing there. She placed her book aside, folded her hands in her lap, waited. Quote 24. Quote, he said. Quote 25. Quote. She did not answer at once. She looked at the fire, then at her hands, then at him. The talk will be very cruel, Sebastian. It will pass. Talk always passes, one of the world's few reliable mercies. Thomas will come to understand what has been spoken of him. Thomas will come to understand that his mother possessed more courage than any woman he shall ever meet, and that his father was a man who recognized his extraordinary fortune far too late, but who recognized it in the end. I will tell him myself, when he is of an age to hear it. I will not allow him to learn it from another's mouth. She was quiet for a long time, then she said, quote 26, quote 27. The faintest smile caught the corner of her mouth. Quote 28, she said. Quote 29, quote 30. She stood, she crossed the hearthrug and placed herself before him, and he rose as well, and for a moment neither spoke. A moment that seemed to hold within it 4 years and a great deal more. Quote 31, she said quietly. Quote 32. He took her hand. He did not draw her into his arms because they were not yet there, and because certain things must be approached with the patience they have earned. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it gently, once upon the knuckles where the cold of the window frame had whitened them a month before. Quote 33, quote 34, quote 35, quote 36, quote 37, she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, though her eyes were. They were married on the 3rd of January in the private chapel at Ravenscourt Abbey, before a fire that had been burning since the previous night to drive the chill from the ancient stones. Mrs. Harrington wept openly and offered her apologies afterward. The steward wept as well, with greater discretion. Thomas, who had been informed that morning that Lord Ravenscourt was to become his papa, received this intelligence with his customary gravity, and then, when the ceremony had concluded, walked the full length of the aisle on his own small feet and presented Sebastian with the wooden horse he had been carrying in the park on the afternoon